senior NFL reporter, lead content strategist for the Monday Morning Quarterback. Albert, let me start with what we think is the truth that Adam Schefter reported on the night of the draft, that Aaron Rodgers wants out of Green Bay. Told the team that. We haven't heard anything. I don't know if it's confirmed by anybody, but it's become fact.
Right.
Has anybody confirmed that Aaron Rodgers said to the Packers, I want out?
I mean, I can tell you that they've had like numerous conversations over the last few months, which has included trips to California, Matt LaFleur, Brian Gutekunst, the people in charge in Green Bay, to try to eradicate the issue between the team and the player. And I think Aaron Rodgers, like I've said this to you all along, I think, Dan, is that like we should listen to him. We should have listened to him in January. We should listen to him, when he's confirmed a lot of what he said initially to Pat McAfee. And I don't think anything that Aaron Rodgers does is a mistake. He's calculating. He's very intelligent. He understands the media. Like I fail to believe that any of this stuff is by accident. And so, the Packers are very well aware that they've got a situation on their hands that they've got to find a way to fix. They got a team that's in a position to win right now. You look at the age of their core too. A lot of guys that are smack dab in the middle of their prime on big contracts. They're going to do everything they can to try to get Aaron Rodgers back in house. There's an awareness there that Jordan Love's not ready to go. And, I really think that, if you just watch the way the Packers have operated over the last 3-4 months, there's no question there's a very serious problem there. And, I think a big part of it is what Aaron wants, which, it looks a lot like, I think, what Tom Brady has now in Tampa.
But the trade discussions, it doesn't really feel like there's any firmness to the reporting on it. It's almost like we're wishful reporting here, or we're wishful speculating. Well, what would Denver have to offer? What about the Raiders?
Yeah.
I don't know what his market value is. I don't know if they've made an offer. Has Denver called Green Bay? Has the Raiders, have they called Green Bay?
I'm assuming everybody's called them. Now, when I talked to Brian Gutekunst on draft weekend, he said that he had just gotten one call the day of the draft, and that was it. And obviously, John Lynch acknowledged that the Niners made a phone call, so you can put 2 and 2 together on that. But I mean, I would assume at the very least, and I don't know this for a fact, that the Broncos GM, George Payton, picked up the phone and called, that the Raiders GM, Mike Mayock, picked up the phone and called. If you see that Aaron Rodgers is going to be interested in you, it'd be almost irresponsible not to make those phone calls. And I think the other thing you can look at here, Dan, is a lot of these teams have left their options open. Denver and Carolina really like Justin Fields. They wind up passing on him. Their options are open to go and get veteran quarterbacks. We see, Miami, I think, still sitting out there with a lot of capital. And I think maybe they'd be more in the Deshaun Watson sweepstakes than the Aaron Rodgers sweepstakes, if these sweepstakes ever happen. But there are, a number of teams out there that have left their options open. And, at this point, I think the Aaron Rodgers thing is where the Deshaun Watson thing was 3 months ago, where back then Nick Caserio was getting phone calls and giving everybody a flat no. The Packers' response to anyone calling has been, we're not trading Aaron Rodgers. We'll see if that changes over time.
Boy, that's a dangerous game that some of these teams played on draft night, that you love that quarterback. It's a young quarterback. Mm-hmm. And you decide that, hey, we're not going to take a quarterback that we think could be our future because we might be in the chase for Aaron Rodgers. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know if it's just that. I mean, look, for both Denver and Carolina, it was literally the top defensive player in the draft, in their opinion. J.C. Horn for Carolina, Patrick Surtain for Denver, versus going all in on Justin Fields. And if you take Justin Fields, then you're tied to him. Like your job security, if you're Matt Rule, your job security, if you're Vic Fangio and George Payton, it ties directly to those guys, to that guy, if you draft him that high. But I do think that a piece of it for both those teams was maintaining flexibility at the quarterback position, knowing how quickly things have changed at that position over the last 6 months. And I think there's an acknowledgement there too, Dan, and this is league wide. I mean, if you talk to any general manager, they'll acknowledge this. The way quarterbacks are being handled is starting to change. And I think a huge part of that goes back to Tom Brady and the way that the Bucs have built around Tom Brady and the way the Bucs have mortgaged contracts to win in a certain window with Tom Brady. And the fact that Tom Brady took the risk of changing teams so late in his career, and it worked, and they won the Super Bowl. And so, I think that there are some teams that are looking at like the landscape right now, the NFL, and saying, if these high-end quarterbacks are going to be available, if Deshaun Watson or Aaron Rodgers is going to be available over the next 4 or 5 months, maybe we're best off taking a really good player at the top of the draft and keeping our options open at the most important position.
But if you were going to, I guess it's a hunch, and maybe that's not fair to you, who's the quarterback week 1 for the Packers? Who's the quarterback week 1 for the Texans?
The quarterback week 1 for the Packers, I believe, is going to be Aaron Rodgers. I think they'll find a way to fix it. Now it's going to be complicated because I think what Aaron wants, like the ship sort of sailed on that. I think what Aaron wants is, again, like the Packers to build with the same sort of urgency that the Bucs have built around Tom Brady. And I think it's like, how do you do that now, right? Like free agency is over, the draft's over. I mean, you're into the end of May. Like, I mean, maybe you can trade for Julio Jones, but what can you do other than make promises to Aaron Rodgers that we're going to take the way that we've done business for the last 30 years and we're going to throw it out starting in 2022? Is that how you get him back in? Maybe it is, but I think that something like that has to happen. And then the Texans, I think the likelihood right now is that Tyrod Taylor is the starting quarterback there. And I also think there's a likelihood that Deshaun Watson's played his last game as a Texan. I think whenever we get clarity on the legal situation and the league situation, I do think Houston's going to wind up moving him, and I'm not sure where. But I do know that the tone in that building changed a whole bunch from January to the end of March into April. I talked on my podcast to the GM there, Nick Caserio, and I gave him, a half dozen different chances to say, Deshaun Watson is our quarterback. Deshaun Watson is going to be our starter, and he wouldn't do it. And that was a very marked change from where they had been even like 3 or 4 weeks before that. And so I think that there's a likelihood that Deshaun Watson gets moved whenever the league and the legal system give us clarity on all of where he stands.
He's Albert Breer, senior NFL reporter, lead content strategist for the Monday Morning Quarterback. I know you mentioned this yesterday, which is part of the reason why I wanted to have you on, that, don't count out Miami with Deshaun Watson. It feels like that has been the destination that he wants, and that's the quarterback they want, even though they have Tua Tagovailoa. So why do you think that that's still a possibility?
He gives them a chance to get a lot better at the most important position on the field without blowing up what they've been doing for the last 3 off seasons. I do know that, Brian Flores is confident in the culture that he's built, and the ability to absorb, a story like that. I think he feels like, he's got the organization in a place where they can do that. And if you look at the capital they've got to offer Houston, think about this, Dan. Like, Nick Caserio comes from New England. What college program is New England closest to? Closest to Alabama, right? So you would think that Nick Caserio probably has good information on Tua. So I think Tua in a Miami-Houston deal could wind up becoming a really interesting chip where maybe Nick Caserio looks at it and says, we get Tua in here. Now we've got Tua and Davis Mills, who we took in the 3rd round, throw them into a competition behind Tyrod Taylor. Maybe we have something at quarterback then that can answer the question long-term for us. And then Miami has a 1st-round pick next year and 2 first-round picks in 2023 to offer. So you add all of it up, and with the capital that they have, you could really offer something enticing to Houston without completely blowing up what you've been building for the last 3 years. And when you're talking about trading for a player like a Deshaun Watson or an Aaron Rodgers, like in most cases, you've got to completely blow up your timeline, right? Like you've got to, all right, like we're getting rid of all this draft capital. We're going to build our team a different way. Miami doesn't have to do that. Miami's set up in a way where they could go and get Deshaun Watson, give Houston something really good, and come out of it still sort of on the same timeline they've been building on for the last 3 years.
Urban Meyer and his decisions that he's made, whether it's bringing in the strength and conditioning coach from Iowa, and that didn't do well. drafting a running back, Travis Etienne, and maybe making him a wide receiver. Now you have Tim Tebow here. Is there a perception of Urban Meyer that's forming, in your opinion, of just what he's doing as a NFL coach as opposed to a college coach?
So, like, if you look at his staff, there are a lot of NFL assistants, right? Like a lot of guys who are plainly NFL coaches. Now, there are some guys like Charlie Strong on the staff that go back with him, but there's, Chris Ash, but there are like guys that are, like Darrell Bevel, like Brian Schottenheimer, like Joe Cullen that are strictly NFL assistants. I think what you look at when you see some of the moves you're talking about is maybe Urban is going to adjust some, but he's also going to bring a lot of what he already was at the college level with him. And I think the proper comparison for Travis Etienne, if you want to really look at it, is Percy Harvin at Florida or Curtis Samuel at Ohio State. Like that's what I think they envision Travis Etienne being. And it also explains why you take Etienne, even though you've got James Robinson and Carlos Hyde at tailback already. So like you see him in sort of that H-back role, then go over to Tebow. What's Tebow? Well, if you look at what Urban Meyer became the last few years at Ohio State, really he's more of a culture coach than anything else. He's a program builder. And what do coaches like that do? Well, they value guys who can sell what they're bringing into a program in the locker room. And Tim Tebow can do that over the next 3 or 4 months for Urban Meyer. So maybe he makes it, maybe he doesn't. But at the very least, he's got a guy who, has some name recognition in the locker room who can help Urban try to sell the program that he's bringing to the NFL. And so I think when you add those things up, Dan, I think you see, while Urban is willing to bend some, and that shows in all the NFL assistants he's brought in, he's also got his own ideas that have worked for him for the last 20 years that are absolutely coming with him.
Why is Tebow so polarizing to people?
It's fascinating because I don't even know how to answer this, Dan. It's weird, right? Like, but I think a big part of it is he was on the front end of playing quarterback in a different way, right? And he was sort of on the front end of the NFL game changing to adjust to allow quarterbacks like this to play in the league. And around the same time that like a Cam Newton came into the NFL, a Robert Griffin III came in the NFL. Now all of a sudden, like your Tommy Frazier's and your Scott Frosts from 30 years ago were getting a shot in the league. And so you had this guy coming from Florida who didn't really look like he could play the quarterback position in a conventional manner, but was such an A-plus guy from an intangible standpoint and had such a large following. And there's the religious thing. And so I just think he became polarizing because he was so popular with a certain group of people that automatically that's going to make you sort of another group of people sort of skeptical of who you are as a player. And I probably just did a horrible job of explaining that to you because there's so much there, you know what I mean? But it's weird, right? Like I'll give you this. I went back. And so I talked with John Fox a couple days ago about Tebow as a tight end. And he brought to light to me, he said like, well, we actually put him in a game as a tight end. And I didn't even remember this at all. His second game in Denver, John Fox's second game in Denver, they put him in the game at tight end. And he played 3 plays, and Foxy said to me, he's like, yeah, he looked functional out there. So I went back in my Game Pass and I looked it up. The first thing I noticed about it, Dan, was when he came on the field, the crowd had been quiet, right? And it popped and it was unbelievable. And here's a guy coming in an emergency situation and he's wearing receiver gloves, and he's wearing elbow pads. It's like, you almost forget how just insane that story was. So, that's it. Like I said, I've done a horrific job of answering that question for you, but it's hard to explain, right? Like you just know it when you see it.
But it's gimmicky, but then there's so many things in life that are gimmicky. I go like this guy fighting Floyd Mayweather, Jake Paul or whatever, Logan Paul. Like he's nobody, but it's a gimmick, and he gets a chance to get in the ring with one of the great fighters of all time and make millions of dollars. We take chances, give chances, we do favors. Right. This is just the 90-man roster. And I'm going,
Yeah, and
if a guy is going to lose his roster spot on the 90-man roster, then he deserves to have it in jeopardy if Tebow comes in and takes it from you.
right, and I guess it's I immediately when you brought all that stuff up, I immediately thought for some reason about Chad Johnson racing the horse.
Well,
Which was
DK Metcalf, they gave him a spot to run in that race.
Yeah. So I think it's, but you know what? Like now that you mention it, it's like kind of, I guess what we're talking about is seeing something that seems absurd on its face, right? And that whole thing was absurd. Like, you remember that Bears game, right? Like where like the ball goes out of bounds. Like, it's just like the weirdest stuff was happening, and it was unexplainable. And it's sort of like backed up, like this guy, like there's just something intangible about this guy that like you can't explain it, and it may look like crap, but somehow at the end of the day, at the end of the game, you look up at the scoreboard and his team has more points than the other team, right? And so like it was just like I guess that's what it is. It's like we all witnessed something that was so like just on its face absurd in 2011, and maybe like in the back of our heads, we're all wondering if some version of that could play out again 10 years later in 2021. That's the best way to explain it, I guess, right? I mean, the guy almost made the 40-man roster with the Mets, and he hadn't played baseball since high school. He's like the real life Forrest Gump.
But
you know what I mean?
But that's gimmicky as well. And they used him and he used them. So there was reciprocation there.
Yeah.
And you know, maybe Jacksonville's doing that, hey, come on in. I mean, imagine when he goes into a game in Jacksonville, in his hometown, he'll get a bigger roar than Trevor Lawrence will.
I mean, that's the other thing. 90 minutes from Gainesville, I think, right? Like, I mean, like maybe this wouldn't be a circus in Kansas City, but in Jacksonville, where like everyone who covers the Gators can just get in their car and drive over, right? Like, I mean, that's the thing about it. Like, that to me is what's so interesting about this calculation for Urban Meyer is like, it'd be one thing if he was bringing in a guy who was maybe a good player for him at Florida or Ohio State and has like a nominal chance of making the roster, right? But the stuff that you're inviting in with Tim, and again, like this isn't even his fault. It just comes with him. Like the circus that you're bringing with him, and then the other players constantly having to answer questions about it. Like, I think the real risk here, and this part's interesting to me. Like, I think the real risk here for Urban is, does it chip away at your credibility at all? Like, if you're bringing him in and you're asking the team to accept him as a NFL tight end, right? And it just looks awful. And then you hang on. Like, so like, let's say we get to training camp and it looks terrible the first 3 days of camp, right? And remember, Tebow like didn't look good in practice at quarterback in Denver. So like, let's say like it just doesn't look right the first 3 or 4 days. Does Urban have to get rid of him? Right? Because the guy's not on scholarship. Like, does Urban have to get rid of him?
Yeah, imagine cutting him.
Right. So at that point, like, do you get rid of him, and if you hang on to him for another couple of weeks, does that chip away at your credibility? Because there are other guys trying to make the team there, right? That are looking at it and saying to themselves, well, wait a minute, like this guy, like, what is this? Like, why is this happening over here? The guy's, I mean, and it's not like he's 23 years old. It's not like you're projecting 3 years into the future. You know what I mean? Like what's the real upside here? The guy's not going to become Tony Gonzalez. At least I don't think so.
No, he's not.
No. You know, like, so that's the thing about it. Like that, the credibility part of it, I think is really interesting because Urban takes that stuff so seriously. You know what I mean? Like having credibility with his players. And that's why so many of his guys believe in him so deeply, is because he's brought such credibility to the table in everything that he does. And that's what's so interesting. You sort of wonder, like, what's the plan for him? And does Urban just have a blind spot for this guy, or is there something more to it?
Great to talk to you, Albert. Thanks. We appreciate your time.
All right. Great to talk to you, Dan.
That's Albert Breer, the Monday Morning Quarterback. Play of the Day's up next.